So I remember I was in university and we were going to have a talk about Balochistan. And the whole campus was buzzing because the talk was going to host some very prominent Baloch people who were going to tell their side of the story as to what's going on there. And this story was a little different than the narrative that we had all been told. But 30 minutes before the talk took place, it was cancelled. And there was no news about it, nobody would be talking about it, everything was so hush-hush. We had an idea why the talk was cancelled or who cancelled it, but then again, that didn't dampen the curiosity as to what was going on. And especially in the case of Balochistan, the entirety of Pakistan doesn't really know what's going on there, and it's so difficult to actually find reliable information because access to all that kind of information and even access in terms of going to Balochistan is very, very limited. So maybe it's because of this, or maybe because I just love traveling, that my heart honestly yearns to be able to visit Balochistan and to see what's going on there. What are the people like? Because I've met some Balochi people in university and I remember having the best time with them. But for now, the least I can do is talk about the beautiful and mesmerizing Balochi language. I've heard songs and poetry in it in some of the few recent years, especially due to Coke Studio. Everybody has been mesmerized by how soul-touching Balochi actually is, even though we didn't understand the lyrics without the translation, but still. So this is a history of the Balochi language. Hi, my name is Misha and welcome to Tarikhi Tales. And as usual, you can find all of my sources down below in the description box. And make sure to like, share, subscribe. Now, linguists actually classify the Balochi language as Northwest Iranian. The general consensus among linguists and historians is that the Balochi-speaking people actually came from the northwest and settled into what is now southeastern Iran and western Pakistan. And this migration that I'm talking about, most of this took place between the years 1000 CE to 1500 CE, which is still a long time ago. But the community of Baloch people is actually a very, very ancient one, because we even find the name Baloch occurring in sources even before the Islamic period. Now, when we look at what the Balochi say for themselves, we have pieces like Baloch epic poetry, which was actually compiled by M. Longworth Dames in 1907. And the Baloch themselves claim to have come from Syria. Now, according to them, in the 11th century, they were passing through an area called Kerman, which is today located in southeastern Afghanistan. And at that time, that area was ruled by Masood Ghazni. And moving from there, they finally arrived in the Indus Valley near the 15th century, or perhaps even as late as the 16th. Now, obviously, they brought with them the Baloch identity and culture. And when they settled in that area, all the people who were actually settled there before them kind of assimilated into their own identity. That means they were also kind of Balochized, if that makes sense. They were also kind of influenced by the Balochi people and took on their culture and their practices. Some communities actually settled down while others remained nomadic. And we have a lot of references where we see that the Balochi people themselves would call the nomadic people true Balochis because that is the actual way of life that they previously had, and the nomads were kind of preserving it, while being settled in stationary communities was a very, very new concept. Today, more than 9.4 million people speak Balochi worldwide, and the map I'll show you on the screen shows areas where we have most of the Balochi speakers. But they're not all of the areas, because we do find diasporas of Balochi people in areas like the Gulf states, in Turkmenistan, in East Africa, and other countries as well. Now, the Balochi language has always struggled when it comes to being standardized or being used as a state language. In 1638, a Balochi state was actually established in the area of Kalat, which is in modern-day Pakistan. This state was called the Khanat of Kalat. But even though the state was primarily run by Balochis, the Balochi language was never standardized there, or was not even being used as a state language. Instead, Persian was being used as a state language, which was actually the trend during that time throughout South Asia and even beyond. Now, eventually, this Khanat of Kalat was attacked by Ahmad Shah Durrani and was kind of incorporated into the Afghan Empire in the late 1740s. But only 10 years later, in 1750, the state actually broke away and became independent again. That is, until the arrival of the British in about 1839. Now, other than the Khanat of Kalat, we have some other instances where Balochis made some efforts to conquer settled areas, but not a lot has been documented or written about those efforts. There are some clues that there were efforts, we just don't know the details. Some of the cases that we know like this are, for example, of the Baloch Talpur Mirs, who actually ruled Sindh before the British took over in 1843. Another example is in Las Bela, which was kind of established in 1742 under the local title of Jam. In both of these cases that I've mentioned, the population was actually Sindhi, and Sindhi in the early 16th century had become a written language. But even then, the literacy rates were low, and Balochi was not the language that was kind of imposed on them. Balochi was the language of the ruling family. And it was actually under the British that efforts were finally started to being made, especially by the locals themselves, to write down the Balochi language and standardized a script for it. Today, Balochi language obviously has a script, it's standardized, but still sources say that very few Balochi people actually read Balochi, and even fewer write it, and those who do mostly reside in Pakistan. Now, the literacy rates of Balochi were actually kind of helped by foreigners in the 19th century, especially the missionaries that came to convert people towards Christianity. Now, some publications that actually helped to grow the Balochi language were publications like Balochistan District Gazetteer series, which was published between 1906 and 1907. Now, this series contained a lot of information about the Balochi language itself, as well as the cultural life and the identity of the Balochi people. Now, the earliest periodical publications that we see in the Balochi language were by the name Bolan, which was published in Quetta as early as the 1930s. Now, the Balochi remained under the British until 1947, and after Pakistan was made, the Balochi States Union acceded to Pakistan in 1948. Balochi was then also recognized as one of the national languages, and the state also began to fund some publications in Balochi. Now, other efforts that were kind of taking place in early days in Pakistan to support the Balochi language included things like regular Balochi radio broadcasts, the establishment of a Balochi Academy in 1957 in Quetta, and a Balochi Studies section at Balochistan University in Quetta, which was established in 1997. Now, what this section does is that it basically teaches and also sponsors research and work being done on the Balochi language and literature. Now, the radio broadcasts that I was talking about, they were started in 1949 and they were coming on daily for about 45 minutes. The Balochi Academy we talked about in Quetta, and with the help of the federal government, its contribution towards Balochi was mainly seen in publications of different books and the organization of literary meetings. In the case of Pakistan, there have also been efforts done to kind of teach Balochi at a primary level. Now, due to Benazir Bhutto, in 1990, the language of Balochi, Baruhi, and Pashto were actually introduced as primary languages for younger classes. But in the year 1992, they became optional, and unfortunately, a lot of parents themselves opted their children out of these classes. And this is a case that we've also seen with the Punjabi language and other languages where parents themselves prefer the children to learn languages like Urdu or English, which would have better implications for their future and opportunities rather than regional languages. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, that Balochi people actually existed in other countries as well, notably Iran and Afghanistan. Now, in the case of Afghanistan, after the establishment of the Khalqi government in 1978, Balochi was declared one of the 7 national languages of Afghanistan. And this thing actually continued for a while, even while the country was under strife from different areas. But historically, we've seen that in Afghanistan, the languages of Pashto and Dari are actually given more preference. And when the regime changed in 1996 and the Taliban came into power, no official announcements as to what the official language is was actually made. But later in Afghanistan, we see that in 2004, there were some announcements made that, okay, Dari and Pashto are the official language, but in areas where the rest of the 7 original languages that were kind of also the national languages, where the people speak a majority of that language. For example, if an area has more Balochi speakers, then Balochi would be the national language there, and Dari and Pashto would be the next national languages. In this video, I'm not touching upon the current state of things in any of the countries, so that's out of the scope of this video. Now, when we talk about Iran, its 1906 constitution actually does not acknowledge Balochi as a national language, but it does allow the use of local languages even in media. So that's that. It's also important to note that even in the case of Turkmenistan, we find that the Balochi language is given a certain level of recognition. But maybe more on this in some other video. So this was a short overview of the Balochi people and the Balochi language. Let me know what you think and what more would you like to see. See you guys next time. Bye.